Commander Zethrak had witnessed humans tear apart battleships with their bare hands.
He'd seen them survive plasma burns that would liquefy most species. He'd watched them charge into certain death with nothing but determination and primitive projectile weapons. But none of that prepared him for what he discovered when he followed human Sergeant Marcus Chen off duty. The galaxy knew humans as unstoppable warriors, impossible to break, immune to fear. Every species whispered the same stories: humans who fought for days without sleep, humans who refused to surrender even when outnumbered 1,000 to 1, humans who somehow turned every defeat into eventual victory. What they didn't know was that humans had been hiding their true weapon all along.
And it wasn't what anyone expected. Commander Zethrak's 6 eyes tracked the human sergeant as he walked through the corridors of Station Omega-7.
The Kytherian officer had been studying humans for 3 rotations now, ever since they joined the Galactic Defense Force, and still couldn't understand them. Marcus Chen moved with that typical human casualness, his shoulders relaxed despite the weight of combat gear that would crush most other species. The man had just finished a 16-hour patrol through the asteroid belt, hunting down Ravager pirates who'd been terrorizing supply convoys. He'd taken down 4 ships single-handedly when his squadron got separated, and now he walked like he'd been taking a pleasant stroll. Impossible creatures, Zethrak muttered in his native tongue, his mandibles clicking with frustration. The other species in the defense force had their strengths.
Kytherians like himself had superior tactical minds and could process multiple battle scenarios simultaneously. The Vrexians were living tanks with hide thick enough to stop plasma bolts. The Zilani could phase through solid matter and strike from unexpected angles. But humans?
They had no special abilities.
No natural armor,
No enhanced strength, no telepathy or energy manipulation. By all logic, they should have been the weakest members of the Alliance.
Instead, they were the most feared warriors in the galaxy. Chen stopped at a junction and glanced back.
For a moment, Zethrak thought he'd been spotted, but the human just scratched his head and continued walking.
The commander pressed himself against the wall, using his natural camouflage to blend with the metallic surface. He'd been following different humans for weeks, trying to understand their secret.
In combat, they displayed an almost supernatural resilience. Pain that would incapacitate other species barely slowed them down. They fought with a creative brutality that caught enemies off guard.
Most unsettling of all, they seemed to grow stronger as battles became more desperate.
The Battle of Kepler Station was still talked about in hushed tones across the galaxy. 12 humans had held off 3,000 Ravagers for 6 days, using nothing but standard weapons and improvised tactics.
When reinforcements finally arrived, they found the humans still fighting, surrounded by enemy corpses, singing some kind of battle song. Chen turned down a corridor Zethrak had never explored before.
The lighting here was softer, more yellow than the standard blue-white illumination used throughout the station. Strange symbols marked the walls, and the air carried unfamiliar scents.
This was the human section of the station. Zethrak hesitated.
Few non-humans were allowed in these areas. Officially, it was for cultural preservation, but rumors suggested the humans were hiding something. Some said they conducted dark rituals to fuel their battle fury.
Others claimed they had secret weapons cached away.
The most disturbing theory was that they were somehow communing with the void itself, drawing power from the space between stars. His duty as intelligence officer demanded investigation.
The Defense Force needed to understand their allies, especially ones as powerful and unpredictable as humans.
Chen paused at a door marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly.
He pressed his palm against a scanner, and the door slid open with a soft hiss.
Before it closed, Zethrak caught a glimpse of the interior: warm lighting, soft surfaces, and what looked like smaller humans. The commander's breathing apparatus cycled rapidly.
Smaller humans meant offspring. But why would Chen visit offspring immediately after combat? Most species isolated their young from warriors to prevent contamination by battle stress.
He waited several minutes before approaching the door. His scanning equipment detected multiple life signs inside: 2 adult humans and 3 smaller ones.
The biometric readings were strange.
Instead of the elevated stress hormones and aggressive pheromones he expected from post-battle humans, the signatures showed calm,
even happiness. A sound echoed through the door. Laughter. Zethrak's mandibles clicked in confusion. Warriors didn't laugh after battle. They either celebrated violently or retreated to process trauma. Laughter suggested play, comfort, safety. Things incompatible with the warrior mindset needed for survival. He activated his recording devices and settled in to wait. Whatever the humans were doing in there, he would document it. Command needed answers about their allies' true nature. Hours passed. Occasionally, he heard voices through the door. Chen's deeper tones mixed with higher ones, sometimes multiple speakers at once. The translator in his ear tried to process the words but kept giving contradictory readings. Either the humans were speaking in code, or they were discussing concepts his equipment couldn't properly interpret. More humans passed through the corridor during his vigil. A female with the same dark hair as Chen, carrying what appeared to be supplies. An older male with graying fur on his face, moving slowly but purposefully. Each time, they entered through the same door, and, each time, the sound of laughter grew slightly louder. Near the end of the station's night cycle, Chen emerged. But, he looked different. The casual alertness was still there, but something had changed in his posture. His shoulders were completely relaxed now, and his face showed an expression Zethrak had never seen on a human before. Contentment. The sergeant walked back toward the military section, but his movement pattern was wrong. Instead of the efficient stride of a warrior, he moved like someone savoring each step. He stopped to examine wall decorations, nodded to passing station personnel, even paused to pet a small maintenance robot that crossed his path. This wasn't the behavior of a battle-hardened soldier. This was someone at peace. Zethrak followed at a greater distance, his mind racing. What had happened in that room? What ritual or treatment had transformed a deadly warrior into this person? Chen reached his assigned quarters and paused at the door. He turned, and, for a moment, his eyes seemed to look directly at Zethrak's position. The human smiled, an expression that revealed white teeth. "Good night, Commander," Chen said quietly, then entered his room. Zethrak's camouflage flickered with shock. The human had known he was being followed the entire time. But that wasn't what disturbed him most. It was the realization that he'd spent the entire evening watching a human warrior transform into something else entirely. Something peaceful, content, almost vulnerable. If this was part of their battle strategy, it was unlike anything in galactic military doctrine. Warriors who could switch between states of mind so completely would be unpredictable in the extreme. An enemy might prepare for human brutality only to face human cunning. Or they might expect human tactics only to encounter human rage. But the readings had shown genuine emotion. Chen hadn't been acting or following a protocol. The transformation had been real. Zethrak made his way back to his own quarters, recording devices full of data that raised more questions than they answered. He'd expected to discover humans' secret weapon. Instead, he'd found what might be their greatest mystery. As he reached his door, a thought occurred to him. Chen had known about the surveillance but hadn't tried to stop it or mislead it. The human had voluntarily revealed this transformation, almost as if he wanted it to be observed. The commander's sleep cycle that night was interrupted by recurring thoughts of laughter echoing through metal walls, and the image of Earth's most feared warrior petting a maintenance robot with the same care others might show a wounded comrade. Tomorrow, he decided, he would request permission to study human social structures more directly. Whatever was happening in that room, whatever was causing these transformations, the Defense Force needed to understand it. Even if it challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare, survival, and the nature of strength itself. 3 days later, Commander Zethrak stood before the door that had haunted his thoughts. His request to study human social structures had been approved, though Admiral Korvash had warned him about getting too close to their primitive customs. The door chimed when he approached, and Marcus Chen's voice called out, "Come in, Commander. We've been expecting you." The door slid open, and Zethrak stepped into what could only be described as organized chaos. The room was larger than standard quarters, clearly modified to accommodate multiple occupants.
Soft fabrics covered hard surfaces, and warm light emanated from sources hidden throughout the space. But what stopped him cold were the small humans. 3 of them, ranging from barely reaching his knee to roughly chest height. They stared at him with the same dark eyes as Chen, showing curiosity instead of the fear most young creatures displayed around predators.
Kids, Chen said, gesturing toward them, this is Commander Zethrak.
He's going to be studying how our families work.
Commander, meet Emma, David, and little Sarah.
The smallest one, Sarah, stepped forward and held up a hand.
Hi. Daddy says you have 6 eyes. Can you see 6 different things at once?
Zethrak's translator struggled with her rapid speech and the unfamiliar concepts.
Family? These young humans lived with the warrior?
His mandibles clicked nervously.
Yes, I can process multiple visual inputs simultaneously, he managed. Cool. Emma, the tallest, joined her sister. Can you see behind yourself? Do you ever get dizzy? Why are your teeth so sharp?
Emma, give him space to breathe, the female human from the corridor said, emerging from another room. She was smaller than Chen but moved with the same underlying confidence.
I'm Lisa, Marcus's wife. Welcome to our home.
Wife. The word registered in his translator as a bonding term, but the context seemed wrong.
Warriors didn't bond during active service. Emotional attachments created vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit. I apologize for the intrusion, Zethrak said, falling back on diplomatic protocols. I am conducting research into human social structures for the Defense Force. Of course you are. Lisa smiled, an expression he was learning to associate with human amusement. Marcus told me you'd been following him. Coffee?
She was already moving toward a device that was producing the aromatic steam he'd noticed before. The casual way she offered hospitality to a potential threat violated every survival instinct Zethrak understood. Why are you not concerned about security? He asked bluntly. Marcus laughed, settling into a soft chair while David climbed onto his lap.
Because you're not a threat.
If you were, you wouldn't have spent 3 days working up the courage to knock.
The casual dismissal of his potential danger was somehow more unsettling than if they'd treated him as an enemy.
These humans were either supremely confident in their ability to handle threats, or they possessed some kind of threat assessment capability beyond galactic understanding.
Sarah tugged on his leg armor. Do you want to see my pictures?
Before he could respond, she was pulling him toward a wall covered with colorful markings on various surfaces. His tactical mind automatically began analyzing them for code patterns, but the translator kept insisting they were artistic expressions rather than information storage.
This is my family, Sarah announced, pointing to crude figures drawn in bright pigments.
That's Daddy, that's Mommy, that's Emma, that's David, and that's me. And that's our cat, Mr. Whiskers, but he lives on Earth.
You maintain emotional connections across interstellar distances? Zethrak asked. We miss him, Emma explained, joining them.
But Daddy's job is here, so we had to leave him with Grandma.
Sacrifice.
They had given up something they cared about for duty. This was more understandable, though the fact that they spoke of it openly suggested a different relationship with loss than most species maintained.
Lisa appeared beside him with a steaming container. Coffee. It's a mild stimulant, but mostly we drink it for comfort. He accepted the offering, analyzing its chemical composition while observing the family dynamics.
The young humans moved freely around both adults, climbing on Marcus without apparent concern for his ability to harm them. The female Lisa, despite having no visible weapons or armor, seemed equally unconcerned about protecting her offspring from strangers. Your security protocols are insufficient, he observed.
I could be gathering intelligence on human weaknesses. Are you? David asked from his perch on his father's shoulders. The direct question caught Zethrak off guard. Most species taught their young to avoid interaction with potential threats, not to engage them in conversation.
I am attempting to understand human military effectiveness, he answered honestly.
Good, Marcus said.
The better our allies understand us, the better we can work together. This casual sharing of potentially strategic information went against every military doctrine Zethrak had ever studied.
Unless
you believe your strength comes from something that cannot be replicated or countered, he said slowly.
Something like that.
Lisa settled beside her husband, and the older male from the corridor entered carrying more young humans.
Sorry we're late, the newcomer said. Traffic in the civilian section was brutal. Kids, say hello to Commander Zethrak. More offspring.
These ones looked similar but not identical to Chen's young.
The social structure was becoming more complex.
Uncle Pete, the children chorused, clustering around the newcomer. Chen stood to embrace him, a physical contact that would be considered dangerous between warriors of most species. Pete's my brother, Marcus explained.
These are his kids, Amy, Josh, and baby Kevin. Extended kinship networks, Zethrak murmured, updating his notes. Multiple family units maintain close contact even in military deployment zones.
Family dinner night, Pete explained, beginning to unpack containers of food.
We try to get together at least once a week.
The next few hours challenged every assumption Zethrak had made about human nature. He watched warriors transform into caregivers, observed tactical minds redirect to storytelling, and witnessed combat-hardened hands gently tending to small injuries and hurt feelings. The children showed no fear of any adult present. They argued, played, competed for attention, and expressed emotions ranging from joy to frustration with complete freedom. When conflicts arose, the adults mediated with patience rather than dominance.
Most shocking was the laughter.
It erupted constantly, prompted by shared stories, physical play, and verbal exchanges that his translator interpreted as friendly mockery. The children laughed at the adults laughed at each other, and everyone laughed at situations that should have been stressful. Why do you expose your vulnerabilities so openly, he finally asked during a moment when the young humans were occupied with some kind of competitive activity.
The three adults exchanged glances before Lisa answered. Because love requires vulnerability. Love is a strategic weakness, Zethrak stated. It creates emotional leverage for enemies.
Love is what we fight for, Marcus corrected.
Not duty, not honor, not territory. We fight to protect this. He gestured around the room. Everything else is just methodology. The concept hit Zethrak like a plasma blast. Humans didn't fight despite their emotional attachments. They fought because of them.
Your aggression in combat, he said slowly.
It's not battle fury. It's protective instinct.
Now you're getting it, Pete said, lifting baby Kevin as the child began to cry. Touch our families, threaten our kids, and you don't face soldiers. You face something much worse.
What could be worse than soldiers?
Marcus smiled, but this expression was different from the others Zethrak had seen. It carried an edge that reminded him of the human he'd observed in combat.
Parents. The word carried implications that made Zethrak's breathing apparatus cycle rapidly.
He was beginning to understand why human warriors were so effective. They weren't fighting for abstract concepts or political goals. They were fighting to preserve these connections, these moments of vulnerability and joy.
An enemy could prepare for soldiers who fought for duty or glory. Such motivations had limits, breaking points where survival instinct would override commitment. But warriors fighting to protect their loved ones? That was a motivation that only grew stronger under pressure.
This is your secret weapon, he realized.
Not technology or tactics or superior training. Emotional investment. Family isn't a weapon, Lisa said firmly. It's what makes us human.
But, as Zethrak watched Sarah climb onto his lap to show him more pictures, as he listened to the casual way the adults discussed everything from tactical improvements to childhood memories, he began to understand that the humans had stumbled onto something unprecedented in galactic warfare. They had found a way to maintain the connections that made life worth living while developing the strength to protect those connections against any threat. No wonder they were so terrifying in combat.
They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for love.
2 weeks after the family dinner, Zethrak found himself in the most unlikely position of his military career, sitting in a circle on the floor of the human section's common area, surrounded by 37 human children and a dozen adults, listening to something called a story. The human telling it, an elderly female named Margaret Chen, had introduced herself as Marcus's mother. She spoke without technological assistance, using only her voice and gestures to create images in the listeners' minds. And so the brave little robot rolled through the dangerous asteroid field, carrying medicine to the sick colony, even though his battery was almost dead and his sensors were failing. The children hung on every word. Some sat perfectly still, others moved restlessly, but all were focused on the narrative unfolding. Even the adults seemed absorbed, despite having surely heard such tales many times before. Zethrak's research had expanded beyond simple observation. Admiral Korvash had approved extended cultural exchange after Zethrak's initial reports suggested humans possessed psychological advantages that could benefit the entire defense force. What he discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about warfare, survival, and the nature of sentient civilization itself. "Did the robot make it, Grandma Chen?" Sarah asked during a dramatic pause. "What do you think?" Margaret asked back. "What would you have done in his position?" The question sparked immediate debate among the children. They offered suggestions ranging from creative to impossible, but Margaret listened to each one seriously, occasionally asking follow-up questions that made the young humans think deeper about their proposals. This was education, Zethrak realized. But, unlike any educational system in galactic records, instead of downloading information or conditioning responses, the humans were teaching their young to think, to imagine, to consider multiple possibilities. After the story session ended and the children dispersed to other activities, Zethrak approached Margaret. She was smaller than most human adults he'd met, with white hair and lines around her eyes that his research indicated were markers of age and experience. "Why do you encourage them to question the narrative?" he asked. "Because life doesn't come with predetermined answers," she replied, beginning to clean up the area where the children had gathered. "They need to learn how to think for themselves. But this creates unpredictability in behavior patterns. Military effectiveness requires standardized responses to threats." Margaret paused in her cleaning and looked at him with an expression he'd learned to recognize as patient amusement. "Commander, how many species in the galaxy fight the same way?" "Each species has developed tactics suited to their natural abilities and social structures," he answered automatically. "Exactly. So if humans all fought alike, we'd be predictable to our enemies. By teaching our children to think creatively, we ensure that human responses remain adaptable." The logic was sound, but the methodology was terrifying. Humans were deliberately cultivating unpredictability in their own young. This explained why human military tactics were so difficult to counter, why they seemed to develop new approaches to problems faster than other species could analyze them. "There's something else you should see," Margaret said. "Marcus tells me you're trying to understand what makes us effective in combat." She led him to another area of the human section, where a different kind of gathering was taking place. Adults sat in small groups, some holding very young humans, others simply talking quietly together. The atmosphere was subdued compared to the story session, but equally focused. "Support group," Margaret explained. "For parents whose partners are on dangerous assignments." Zethrak observed the interactions with growing understanding. These humans were sharing emotional burdens, distributing stress across the social network instead of allowing individuals to bear it alone. When one female began crying while describing her fears, the others moved to physically comfort her without being asked. "You maintain emotional stability through collective processing," he noted. "We take care of each other," Margaret corrected. "Always have, always will. It's how we survived on Earth, and it's how we'll survive out here." A commotion from the children's area drew their attention. Two young humans were engaged in a physical conflict over some kind of toy. Instead of adult intervention, the other children were attempting to resolve the dispute themselves, offering solutions and alternative activities. When the adults finally stepped in, it wasn't to punish the fighters but to help them understand each other's perspectives. The resolution involved both children apologizing and finding a way to share the disputed object. "Conflict resolution training begins early," Zethrak observed.
Living in close quarters requires cooperation, Margaret agreed. But, more than that, we teach them that other people's feelings matter. Empathy isn't weakness, Commander. It's how we build the connections that make us stronger. That evening, Zethrak attended another family dinner, this time with extended observations. He watched Marcus return from a particularly difficult patrol, visibly exhausted and stressed. But, within minutes of entering the family quarters, the signs of combat tension began to fade. It wasn't just rest or relaxation. The humans had a specific process. Marcus spent time with each child individually, listening to their daily experiences, offering guidance for their problems, participating in their games. He talked with Lisa about domestic concerns that had nothing to do with military operations. He helped with household tasks that required no particular skill. Each activity seemed designed to reconnect him with the life he was fighting to protect. This is psychological warfare, Zethrak realized suddenly. But, directed inward, not at enemies. How do you mean? Lisa asked, looking up from helping David with some kind of educational exercise. You deliberately reinforce the emotional connections that motivate combat effectiveness. By regularly experiencing what you fight for, you maintain peak motivation levels. Marcus laughed. You make it sound like a military strategy. We just love our families. But, Zethrak was beginning to understand that love itself was the strategy, even if humans didn't consciously recognize it. By maintaining these connections, by regularly experiencing joy and affection and purpose, they ensured that their warriors never forgot why they fought. Other species separated military and civilian lives to prevent emotional interference with combat duties. Humans integrated them specifically to enhance combat motivation. The breakthrough came during what the humans called a birthday party for young Emma. Zethrak watched dozens of families gather to celebrate one child's completion of another year of life. They brought gifts, shared food, and engaged in activities that served no strategic purpose except to demonstrate affection for the young human. But, the celebration was interrupted by an emergency alert. Ravager ships had been detected approaching the outer system, moving faster than expected. All military personnel were recalled to duty immediately. Zethrak expected chaos as warriors were torn between duty and family obligations. Instead, he witnessed something unprecedented. The children, understanding the situation, began helping the adults prepare for deployment. They fetched equipment, offered encouragement, and accepted the sudden departure without protest. The adults maintained calm efficiency while expressing love and reassurance to their families. Come back safe, Daddy, Emma said, hugging Marcus tightly. Always do, Princess, he replied. Take care of your mom and siblings for me. She straightened with visible pride at being given responsibility. I will. As the military personnel departed for their ships, Zethrak realized he'd witnessed the human secret weapon in full operation. These weren't just soldiers leaving for battle. They were protectors carrying the memory of what they defended, reinforced by recent contact with those they loved. The subsequent battle was the most efficient human military operation Zethrak had ever observed. The warriors fought with precision, creativity, and absolute determination. They took risks that should have been suicidal but somehow succeeded through a combination of skill and pure will. When the Ravager fleet was destroyed with minimal human casualties, Zethrak finally understood what made humans so terrifying in combat. They weren't fighting because they had to. They were fighting because they chose to, every single day, recommitted to that choice by love renewed each time they returned home. Other species could match human technology, tactics, even raw aggression. But, no other species had learned to weaponize love itself, to transform emotional connection into strategic advantage. In his final report to the Defense Force, Zethrak recommended immediate implementation of human family support protocols across all allied species. Not because other races should become like humans, but because the principle was universally applicable. Warriors who had something precious to defend would always fight harder than those fighting for abstract concepts. But, he also included a warning that would echo through galactic military thinking for generations to come: never threaten human families. You won't be facing soldiers.
You'll be facing parents, grandparents, siblings, and friends who will stop at nothing to protect what they love.
There is no force in the galaxy more dangerous than a human fighting for their family. The report concluded with a single observation that became doctrine: humanity's greatest weapon isn't their technology or tactics. It's their refusal to sacrifice love for survival, and their discovery that love itself makes survival more likely. Years later, when other species began adopting modified versions of human family integration policies, military effectiveness across the galaxy improved dramatically. But none ever quite matched the human success, because none were willing to embrace vulnerability as completely as Earth's children did. They had learned something the rest of the galaxy was still trying to understand: that true strength comes not from eliminating weakness, but from having something worth being weak for.